Well, good morning from Mission Control Houston, and welcome to today's International Space Station update. Joining us here inside of the flight control room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, the Orbit 2 team currently on console right now, monitoring the International Space Station during a very busy time, seeing a visiting vehicle departing this morning, the Japanese HTV vehicle, which was backed away just a few hours ago from the Earth-facing side of the Harmony node. All eyes on board the station currently pointed. This unmanned cargo craft scheduled to depart a little bit later this morning, currently attached to the space station's robotic arm. It's been docked to the station since July 27th and will soon release and back away and then set itself up for a re-entry trajectory with the Earth's atmosphere, where it'll pass over and burn up over the Pacific Ocean, bringing an end to the third flight of this Japanese cargo craft. Meanwhile, here in Mission Control, the team's being led today by Flight Director David Korth. You can see him there in the white shirt, and then joining him at the Capcom position is NASA astronaut Katie Coleman, serving as the voice communication link between all of our controllers here on the ground and the astronauts up in space. And those astronauts right now are crew of Expedition 32, 3 of which scheduled to come home this upcoming weekend. Those 3 over there on the right, the one in the middle, Expedition 32 Commander Gennady Padalka, a veteran space flyer on his 4th flight, and then behind him on the left, NASA astronaut Joe Akaba, and all the way on the right there is Russian cosmonaut Sergei Revin. The 3 have been docked to the International Space Station since May 16th, scheduled to land this upcoming Sunday in their Soyuz TMA-04M vehicle as they touch down on the steppes of Kazakhstan. Again, that'll be coming up this Sunday, and we'll leave our other 3 crew members on board the International Space Station. Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, and then NASA astronaut Sonny Williams, and Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. The 3 will remain on board to begin the increment of Expedition 33, with Sonny Williams there all the way on the left, taking over the position of commander for that mission, and they'll remain on the station for a few more months as they continue their stint on board the International Space Station. So meanwhile, on board, our astronauts, many of them focused around this HTV vehicle as they work throughout the morning to prepare it for its eventual demating from that Harmony node. Joe Akaba working early this morning to set up the robotic workstation inside of the station's cupola, and then perform the demate with the common berthing mechanism. That demate beginning at about 6:50 a.m. Central Time today. And following all these activities a little bit later, he'll be closing that out and taking down the workstation, and he'll be at the controls when they perform the HTV release, working in conjunction with robotics controllers down here on the ground in Houston. Aside from all this visiting vehicle activity he's doing today, he'll also be gathering some more samples for the Human Research Facility as he prepares to come home. And we'll also be doing a ham radio pass with a school in Dorado, Puerto Rico, using just a standard ham radio to give a chance for students down on the ground here the opportunity to ask him questions one-on-one. Our other NASA astronaut, Sonny Williams, also doing some work today on that HTV vehicle. She was working to close out the vestibule, so the connections between HTV and the International Space Station. Also worked to install some more thermal covers, continuing some work she was doing yesterday with Aki Hoshide, and then was responsible for depressing or preparing the vestibule for HTV's final undocking. Aside from that, today she'll also be going throughout the station and taking some water samples from the potable water dispenser, and also a few over in the Russian service module. Moving on, Aki Hoshide closing out that HTV vestibule alongside Williams and helping out with that thermal cover install. He'll be manning the robotic controls throughout the day alongside Joe Akaba. He also installed a hardware command panel inside of the Japanese module, and also the centerline berthing camera system, which assists both the astronauts and the controllers down here on the ground, giving them a good solid view of the craft as it's backing away from its spot on the International Space Station. He will also have a chance to do a ham radio pass. He did it earlier this morning, talking to a school in Queensland, Australia. And then a little bit later this afternoon, having an event with the Office of the Prime Minister of Japan, inviting the political leader on board the International Space Station to give him a look at what life is like inside for this Japanese astronaut. And meanwhile, our 3 Russian cosmonauts, starting off with Gennady Padalka, who's the current Expedition 32 commander and is also scheduled to come home this Sunday, working with a number of different biological experiments as he prepares to come back, taking some fluid samples for the Russian immuno experiment, which looks to track changes in the immune system response inside of these astronauts during long-duration space flights. Also working on and taking some data reads for the Russian pneumocard experiment, which is the study of the ongoing adaptation of the astronaut's cardiovascular system, one of the many bodily systems inside these astronauts that is subject to change as they're exposed to microgravity for long durations of time. He's also working on setting up the Russian Matryoshka experiment alongside with Yuri Malenchenko, that a radiation experiment that tracks the radiation dosage that these astronauts are being exposed to, named after the set of nested Russian dolls. It has a number of dosimeters or radiation reading devices spaced throughout a mannequin-sized doll that is then plays through different parts or different locations throughout the station to constantly monitor the radiation levels that these astronauts are being subjected to. Meanwhile, Sergei Revin doing some standard maintenance work throughout the Russin segment, uninstalling a few lights in the Poisk module where their Soyuz vehicle that they're scheduled to return home in is currently docked, and also taking out some lights in the Zvezda service module. And then our last Russian cosmonaut, Yuri Malenchenko, will remain on board the station, again working on that Matryoshka alongside of Gennady Padalka, and doing some more follow-up maintenance work on the Russian Electron system, which has been going on since yesterday.
Yeah, the USB is in SSC5 here in Node 3, and the numbers are all entered in the procedure and saved.
Copy. Thanks, Sunny.
No problem.
So getting a good view from one of the centerline cameras that Aki Hoshide worked to set up a little bit earlier this morning. The Japanese HTV vehicle, you can see there, currently grappled by the station's robotic arm. Just in the background, the state of Wyoming and southern Montana passing by in the background, while the station flies about 254 statute miles over the United States. So the third such HTV transfer vehicle. The unmanned cargo craft launched and managed by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency delivered about 4.6 tons of cargo to the Expedition 32 crew members back on July 27th, 3.5 tons inside of its pressurized compartment, which carries up supplies, including different system equipment and maintenance devices, and also science experiments, but then also carrying up food and crew commodities to the Expedition 32 astronauts, bringing up a few interesting items such as an aquatic habitat, also a number of different CubeSats or miniature satellites that are deployed from the International Space Station for various science experiments. Also in that cargo total was a little over 1 ton of payloads in the unpressurized compartment, so payloads intended to be exposed directly to the vacuum of space. And since unberthing HTV from the Harmony module, teams down here in Mission Control have been continuing to orient the station and the robotic arm for the eventual release. The ADCO officer here in Mission Control giving the commands a little bit earlier this morning, about half an hour ago at 8:42 in the morning, to begin orienting the station for its final unberthing or release of this unmanned cargo craft. That release currently scheduled to take place at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be bringing you live coverage of all of that here on NASA TV just a little bit later this morning. So while we continue to get a live look right now at the HTV vehicle currently grappled with that station robotic arm, we do have some views taken a little bit earlier this morning as HTV was being unberthed from the Harmony node. The first commands to begin the demate were given at about 5:50 a.m. this morning. The unberth taking place just a little over an hour later after a number of bolts were then removed, which were securing HTV in place. And following all of the prep work initially this morning to prepare the vestibule and prepare HTV itself for this eventual release was completed. Joe Cava worked on removing 4 sets of bolts which were securing the craft to its spot on the earth-facing side of the Harmony module. And once that was all complete, the commands for demating began, and the craft was slowly backed away by the space station's robotic manipulator system, or SSRMS, or the Canadarm2, which you can see here. Once it was backed away to a safe distance where it remains right now, the teams down here in Mission Control have been continued to maneuver the International Space Station for its eventual release orientation. And that's where the station and HTV are right now. They're standing by for that eventual release. Another good view from one of the station's outboard cameras here. Meanwhile, the Earth's surface continues to pass by in the background as the station flies over at about 17,500 miles an hour. Right now it's just south of Newfoundland, over the Canadian province of Quebec, about to pass over the Gulf of St. Lawrence and out over the northern Atlantic Ocean. Station will remain in this configuration until the scheduled release time of 10:50 a.m. Central Time. And following its final release from the space station's robotic arm, the HTV will then back away while firing its thrusters. That series of engine firings today will also continue tomorrow on Thursday, and we'll send it a safe distance away from the International Space Station. And then once its position is confirmed, they'll start a series of 3 deorbit maneuvers, which will allow it to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere early on Friday morning, where it'll begin its final descent over the Pacific Ocean and harmlessly burn up, bringing an end to the flight of the 3rd Japanese cargo craft. You can see a sped-up animation of just what all of these events are going to look like. We saw the real-time backing away a little bit earlier as it then maneuvered into its final release orientation, which is right about where we're sitting just now. And then that release will take place at 10:50 a.m. Central Time. Continuing to get a good look at this HTV craft as it's grappled with the station's robotic arm. Currently one of 3 visiting cargo vehicles that have been attached to the International Space Station. The other 2, the Russian Progress and the European ATV, will remain on their positions on board the International Space Station. You can see what the full station structure will look like following the departure of HTV. The ATV vehicle all the way in the back there, the largest of these unmanned cargo crafts, will be used tomorrow night, Thursday evening, at about 10:05 p.m. Central Time for a reboost, using its thrusters to raise the station's orbit at the highest point, or its apogee. It'll be raised by about 3 statute miles, or 5 kilometers. This is being done in order to set up the proper phasing angles for the departure of 3 of our crewmates, Padalka, Revan, and Akaba, in their Soyuz TMA-04M vehicle, and also setting up for the launch of the next 3 crew members that'll be traveling to the International Space Station, the remaining Expedition 33 crew of Kevin Ford, Oleg Novitsky, and Evgeny Turelkin, the 3 the 3 will be launching from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in October to bring the station's full crew rotation back up to 6. You can see the 3 here in their Sokol launch and entry suits as they were undergoing some final checkouts and ceremonies over in Russia. Again, that reboost planned for tomorrow night on Thursday at 10:05 p.m. Central Time, using those thrusters on the ATV vehicle to raise the station's orbit at apogee by about 3 statute miles. Continuing to get a pretty spectacular view as the HTV is standing by, grappled to the space station's robotic arm for its final departure from the International Space Station just a little over an hour and about a half from now. Crew on board has been spending a good portion of their day yesterday and today preparing this vehicle for its final departure. Yesterday going through and finalizing all their preparations on the interior. Aki Hoshide also activating the re-entry breakup recorder, which will monitor the vehicle throughout its descent through the Earth's atmosphere before it breaks up over the Pacific Ocean. It'll be sending back video documentation and also a number of other temperature and other readings to continually provide engineers down on the ground with vehicle performance data as the HTV re-enters for its final descent.
Вашим КС по Москве в канале СГ-1 для Геннадия.
ISS is Moscow, expecting at 1 for Gennady. Please go ahead.
Здравствуйте, Геннадий Иванович. Я готова вас выслушать ваши вопросы.
Gennady Ivanovich, I'm here to answer your questions.
Вопрос вот какой. За 221 фамилию ФГБ, там нет укладки.
Well, the question is as follows. There is no phantom set behind the mentioned panel in FGB. Maybe it's at some other place.
Я так понимаю, я туда уложить пеналы за зиметрами, да?
As far as I understand, I was supposed to put
Надо складывать
the
извлеченные
dose meters.
из шарового фантома.
Yes, this is the set where the devices from the phantom that you removed go. There should be also a small Ziploc bag
Маленькими детекторами.
into the same set. A small bag that also has small devices.
Я понимаю, но нет, к сожалению, этой укладки.
Well, but I can't find it.
Да, где еще?
Where else can I look for it?
Мешок, в который все сложено по матрешке.
Maybe the big bag that has everything related to Matryoshka.
В котором все...
А где этот мешок?
Okay, and where is this bag?
Он тоже там же. Вот
А где этот мешок?
221.
Again, the panel 221, maybe 222 in FGB.
А что еще там лежит?
What else can be found there?
Еще в этом
Может быть, последний день не работал кто-то с ней?
Да, сегодня...
Because I think I worked on it recently.
Работа была с бабл-дозиметрами.
Yes, today I worked with bubble dose meters using the same bag.
Да, Юрий Иванович брал этот мешок, и, возможно...
Yuri Ivanovich took this bag and he might have left it in place.
Остается у нас на месте. Может быть, и мешок там же остался.
Probably in there, Sam, and maybe the bag is still there.
Хорошо, 224 панель не подсказывает.
Okay, now he's saying it's 224, panel 224. I'll check.
The Western Sahara Desert now coming into view as we continue to get some pretty spectacular views of the Earth's surface with the Japanese HTV vehicle there grappled with the station's robotic arm. It was demated and unberthed from the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module a little bit earlier this morning at about 7:04 Central Time. Astronauts Joe Akaba and Aki Hoshide working the robotic control panel inside of the station's cupola, or the bay window, the large 7-window module on the Earth-facing side of the station, as they worked in tandem with robotics controllers here in Mission Control Houston. Since unberthing it, the teams down here on the ground have been working to orient the space station as well as the vehicle into its final release attitude, which they have since completed. So everything's still on track for the planned release of this unmanned cargo craft at about 10:50 a.m. Central Time.
MCCM ISS on space 11.
Мне специалист у нас.
This is regarding Matryoshka, I'm the specialist.
Да, я слушаю.
Yes, please go ahead.
А кто работал последний у нас? Смотрю.
Who was the last person who worked with Matryoshka?
Все.
С матрешкой сегодня работает Юрий Иванович 2 часа назад.
Today, Yuri Ivanovich worked on it 2 years ago, 2 hours ago. No, I mean the RCA kit.
А я говорю с Фантомом. Кто
I'm asking about Phantom. Who was the one who assembled all of it?
Снаряжал, устанавливал в модуле Киба Кононенко.
Oleg Kononenko installed it and put it all together to be installed in the Kibo.
И тогда же снаряжал, да?
And
Тогда же снаряжал Фантом.
he was the one who put everything together. I mean, all the devices, all the detectors. Yes, he was the one.
Понятно. Тогда я нашел виновника.
Okay, then I know who's the guilty one.
Первым на панели 200.
This kit was in MRM 1 on panel 205.
Спасибо.
That's very unexpected.
Меня тоже. Вы
Yes,
знаете,
same for me.
We were just hearing some of our Russian cosmonauts speaking with controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov, Russia. They're having a number of maintenance tasks to take care of throughout the day. Russian cosmonaut Sergei Revin removing some lighting fixtures throughout the Zvezda service module, as well as the mini research module 2, or the Poisk module, which is where the Soyuz TMA-04M spacecraft is currently docked, which is scheduled to return Revin back down to the Earth's surface alongside of Russian cosmonaut Gennady Padalka and NASA astronaut Joe Akaba. You can see the full makeup of the station structure here with all of the visiting vehicles. That HTV-3 vehicle all the way on the left there, currently demated from the Harmony module on board the International Space Station and being held by the space station's robotic arm as they prepare for its eventual release. And then the Soyuz TMA-04M there all the way at the top on the zenith with the space-facing side of the International Space Station, docked to the Poisk, which is attached to the Zvezda service module, will be the next vehicle to depart from the International Space Station. That's scheduled to take place this upcoming Sunday, as the undocking and landing of 3 of these Expedition 32 crew members takes place. That landing scheduled to take place at 9:53 p.m. Central Time in Kazakhstan. All of those events kicking off on Saturday with the formal change of command ceremony, where Expedition 32 Commander Gennady Padalka will formally hand over the reins of the International Space Station to NASA astronaut Sonny Williams. And following that on Sunday, all of our actual undocking and landing activities taking place. And as with all dynamic events, we'll be bringing you live coverage here on NASA television. The actual hatch closure, sealing those astronauts into their Soyuz craft, will take place at about 3 p.m. Central Time. Their undocking scheduled at 6:09 p.m. after about 3 hours of leak checks and system verification tests. Following that undocking, the Soyuz will fire its thrusters and perform a series of burns to line it up for landing. Where that final descent through the Earth's atmosphere, they'll separate into the craft into 3 different sections, with the descent module returning the 3 astronauts back down to Earth, with again that landing scheduled to take place in Kazakhstan at 9:53 p.m. Central Time, or 8:54 a.m. Kazakhstan time the following day. And so while this HTV and numerous other vehicles up in space are preparing for their departure, another vehicle down here on the ground preparing for its iconic final flight through the air. You can see the NASA shuttle carrier aircraft, or the SCA, here as it landed just a little bit after 5 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday on Tuesday at the Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility in Florida. This modified 747 jumbo jet, designated the NASA 905, was the original shuttle carrier. It was used back in 1977 for the Space Shuttle approach and landing tests, and a series of 8 captive and 5 free flight tests with the initial orbiter prototype, the Enterprise. This jet will now be used on the final ferry flight in Space Shuttle program history, where at approximately 5 a.m. on Friday, the Space Shuttle Endeavour will leave the vehicle assembly building for the last time and roll over to be mated to this 747 jet. And then it'll back out, and then on Monday we'll be bringing you live coverage on NASA television as Endeavour readies and departs. That coverage beginning at about 6:45 a.m. Eastern Time. Endeavour headed for the California Science Center in Los Angeles. It'll be making a number of flyovers and stops across the country as it makes its final journey. So this, some video taken yesterday as that shuttle carrier aircraft was landing. It'll be used in a number of those preparation activities as they prepare Endeavour on Friday morning and rolling it over to be mated to this jumbo jet, specially modified to carry these space shuttles. This all being done for the final ferry flight in the Space Shuttle program history. Following its takeoff on Monday, it'll do a number of flyovers of the Space Coast, including the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, also Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and the Patrick Air Force Base, before heading west for a multi-day journey on its way towards its final location in Los Angeles International Airport. Here you can see the crew of STS-134, the final crew for the Space Shuttle Endeavour, which flew back in May of 2011, launching to the International Space Station. They were led by Commander Mark Kelly there in the middle. The other crew members were pilot Greg Johnson, and then 4 different mission specialists with Mike Fink and Greg Shamatoff there in the back, and also Drew Feustel and Roberto Vittori from the European Space Agency. Right now, the Orbit 2 team here in Mission Control standing by while we wait to regain our video contact with the International Space Station. Audio satellite still in range, so all the teams in here continuing to stand by for that release of the HTV from the International Space Station, still targeted at just a little over an hour from now at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern. As we did this morning, we'll continue to bring you live coverage of all of the activities with this HTV final departure. The release coverage will pick up here on NASA TV at 10:30 a.m. Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, we'll get into that and recap all of the morning's activities with HTV before that final scheduled release time of 10:50 a.m. Central Time, where the station's robotic arm will be given the commands to release its grapple hold on the HTV vehicle, which will then back away and perform a series of burns to distance itself from the International Space Station. And following these burns, both today and some more engine firings tomorrow on Thursday, it'll send the HTV-3 vehicle a safe distance away from the space station, and then allow it to perform a few more orbital maneuvers, enabling it to begin its final re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere early on Friday morning as it harmlessly burns up over the Pacific Ocean. So much of the work on board the International Space Station centered around this departure of HTV. Three of our astronauts, Akaba, Williams, and Hoshide, spending the vast majority of their morning preparing the vehicle and the station for this departure, and also Akaba and Hoshide standing by and controlling the robotic station inside of the station's cupola as they worked with robo-controllers here in Mission Control Houston to unberth the vehicle and then back it away, and they'll be back at the controls for the final release of HTV. And Sonny Williams giving a hand preparing the vestibule and the Harmony module for the departure of the vehicle, also being responsible for the final depress of the vehicle. So aside from all of this robotics activity, a few of our astronauts taking some time for speaking with different people down here on the ground. One such activity was Aki Hoshide taking and getting a chance to speak with the Prime Minister of Japan. We'll have a replay of that event a little bit later this afternoon, pending successful release of the HTV vehicle. That'll be a little bit later today on NASA TV at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that Aki Hoshide speaking with the Japanese Prime Minister and bringing him on board to give him a glimpse at life on board the International Space Station. And not only talking to dignitaries today, Hoshide also had a chance to do a ham radio pass a little bit earlier this morning with a school in Queensland, Australia, taking about 10 or 20 minutes to speak with students via the ham radio. The station has its own call signs on board and its own radio setup, pretty much an identical copy to one you would find down here on the ground, and gives these students across the globe a chance to directly interact on a one-on-one basis with the astronauts while they're flying about 250 statute miles overhead. Joe Akaba also getting a chance to do that a little bit later this afternoon. He'll be speaking with a school in Dorado, Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, the station right now about 268 statute miles over the Earth's surface. It's just a little bit southeast of South Africa, about to cross the terminator line into an orbital nighttime. About to see these astronauts seeing one of the numerous sunsets they see each and every day as the station travels around the Earth's surface at about 17,500 miles an hour, so completing one orbit roughly every 92 minutes. So once this HTV vehicle undergoes its final release, our astronauts will move through and break down some of the equipment that they have set up. Aki Hoshide will be taking down all of the control panel hardware he set up for commanding the HTV vehicle throughout this process. Joe Akaba also going to be working up to take down some of the robotic workstation controls he has set up in the cupola right now. Aside from that activity, he'll be taking and storing a few more samples for the human research facility. Also doing his ham radio pass a little bit later this afternoon. Akaba, Revan, and Padaka all taking a number of their last biological samples throughout this week, as they'll be stored and then transferred back down to the ground with them on their Soyuz spacecraft. Many of these biological research experiments on board the station look to get samples collected throughout different points of these astronauts' increments in space. So they'll be taking their final end-of-flight samples now, and then be giving a few more on the ground, as many of these research experiments, such as Immuno, which the Russians were working on today, require blood samples both before, during, and after these space flights to effectively track all the different changes that the astronauts' bodies are subjected to while they're in this microgravity environment for months at a time. So moving into the end of today's International Space Station update, we'll have a few more programming notes for you. Be sure to stick around here on NASA TV for our continuing coverage of this HTV departure from the International Space Station. Release coverage will pick up at 10:30 a.m. Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll continue to cover all of the activities that have happened so far this morning and set up for the eventual release from that station robotic arm of HTV, targeted at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern. So again, be sure to stick around here on NASA TV for that continuing coverage. We will be back with more International Space Station update on Friday for a look at all of the week's activities and what life has been like on board the International Space Station. But for now, we will sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.